connect with, I guess, with reality really is that, you know, many of us in this room, as aside to being practitioners, not only are we parents, not only are we grandparents, aunts, uncles, we're members of the community. And I think aside to some of the challenges that we have within our society, I think it's become a real interesting time now where, in my opinion, it's getting quite scary because the things that we hear about, you know, even most recently, I've been looking at a particular case where, you know, young people as, you know, children as young as 11 involved in violent behaviors, and, you know, having a young teenager most definitely has, you know, and I think for many of us would agree, it makes a series of kind of worries and concerns when you know that your children are out and about, potentially in environments where young people may be involved in particular behaviors. And I think to set that scene really is to bring us into that context and understanding that we are in a very much a different time. Shez just mentioned that previously in our introduction. We are in a very different time. And I believe that part of today's session for me, to be totally honest, is about taking a position. If there's one thing that I want to come out of today's session with, is a very distinct position that I intend to take, one that I always talk about within my work, and I think is rooted in a theory that I talk about called desistance. And I think that's really important moving forward and really kind of looking at where are the gaps. And the two things that I want to just take out from this is not only about taking a position, but if we can, through this conversation today, start to look at where are the gaps. Where are the gaps within the literature? Where are the gaps in relation to professional practice? Where are the gaps as it relates to national and social policy? And wherever those gaps are, we have to make a decision on what we're going to do about it. Because what really bothers me about these conversations is that we have the same conversation over and over and over and over and over again. And it just doesn't seem to be feeling that things are moving. And I know that many of you in the room are overwhelmed. Many of you in the room feel that you've got massive caseloads and things don't seem to be changing. So if there's the third thing that I want, not only to enlighten you today, but hopefully to get us to start thinking how we can work smarter and not necessarily working harder. And just as a quick disclaimer, I just mentioned sometimes when I'm talking, having a little bit of a rant, I may mention some, I don't know, topics or maybe of some cases maybe that I've embarked on, some cases that many of you in the room have worked in conjunction with us in relation to those. And some of you may be currently working with some of those young people. I'll try my best not to make it Birmingham specific, but just as a disclaimer, I always kind of just like to give a little bit of context. Sometimes when I'm giving examples, I'll never name young people. So that's nothing that people need to essentially worry about. But it may be a situation or scenario where I may talk about something and it just brings people in light to that particular issue. So I don't tend to be the type of professional that shows images to kind of shock people. I don't believe in that form of education and shocking people, especially children and young people. But rather, if I do talk about a particular incident or an issue, it's also oftentimes I guess, an opportunity for us to have a better understanding about what's taking place within the society. And I think for those of us that are just probably a little bit outdated, for us to be up to the time with essentially what's going on. So that's just a quick disclaimer really for me, is really about how do we move that conversation into action. And I think someone just mentioned that within that. And I think the best place to start really is my research. And I think a lot of people have been kind of fascinated. I always get questions and people say, you know, Craig, what are you actually doing within your PhD? And I think just to kind of take you back a little bit, one of the things that I've been doing, I guess, over the last 2 decades is I've always studied gangs, and I guess street gangs to be specific, in and around the Birmingham area. And I've always been quite fascinated with the way in which the media have a very interesting role in depicting and also creating what I would call individuals in the community that we as a society should be scared of, and the kind of academic term moral panic. But I don't want to have an academic conversation today, but I want to kind of talk in layman's terms. But one of the things I talk about within my research is, I guess, the politics of race and crime. And I know that if you was to go to Google right now and you was to type street gangs in Birmingham, and any documentary that was to pop up on YouTube, or if anything was to pop up on your social media feeds, these are the types of images generally that you're going to come up, that's going to come up essentially on Google. And I guess my fascination with this type of research was oftentimes we don't ever focus on any of the other gangs that talk about violence, that engage in violence, that also utilize firearms and knives and explosives to engage in criminal behavior. And it's just quite interesting that when we talk about violence as it relates to gangs, that we only fixate only on one particular group. And of course, yes, you're going to have those discussions about organized criminality. Of course, you're going to have those conversations about what groups seem to be more sophisticated within their crimes. But regardless of all of those arguments that essentially may be presented, one of the things that we just don't see within the news feeds and oftentimes in the media, unless you're an individual that pays a little bit more cause of concern for the issues around these particular issues, that would pay attention to these particular groups and gangs that exist within our community. And I think this highlights a wider conversation. And one of the things that I don't want to do is kind of bore you with the same conversations, as you heard me say in the beginning, over and over again, talking about the same thing. And I guess what I want to do is just go straight into it in terms of what the literature says, what's missing from the literature, and also the points that I believe that we kind of overlook. So if we look at this through a, let's say, a historical lens, we can go back as far as, the riots. And I would say before even 2011, when the riots took place, there was conversations between that 2008 and 2011 conversation about austerity. This was when we went from a Labour government going into a Conservative government, from Tony Blair to David Cameron. You may remember David Cameron was talking about the big society, the broken society, and all of these things that were going around at that particular time. And that was probably the biggest moment for youth work practitioners nationally, because that's when we started to then experience some severe cuts. And those cuts not only impacted youth and community services, but they also impacted social care, it impacted children's services, and then the ripple effect of what was happening, I guess, in the initial stages. 2011 gave us a reminder nationally of when you cut back, when you make cuts, when austerity and people are living under acute poverty, these are the things that are ultimately going to happen. And I guess after research on the back of all of those particular issues, these are the things that are oftentimes highlighted within the research. Poverty, deprivation, gentrification, I would probably say is more so new, but I would say gentrification has always been a conversation about moving poor people out of particular areas and environments, and then ensuring that individuals that have wealth, finance, can move into a particular area or space. And we see these things happening in different cities, in London, in places like South London, Brixton, and we're starting to see parts of that now in Birmingham. If we think of the Ladywood area going into Birmingham city centre, we're now starting to see what gentrification does as a consequence of that. But we already know within the research that, if we was to go around the room right now, if we had time, I think everybody would probably highlight one of these things about the impact of poor education, the impact of high unemployment, and the fact that people are struggling with work, lack of resources within community. There's not enough funding to deal with the issues that we're worried and we're concerned about: poor housing conditions, racism, trauma, fear, reactive interventions by professionals and organizations, competency of staff. Are they even aware of these issues? Adultification of young people, limited resources within the police, and the list goes on. But if you've noticed, I've highlighted a few things that I argue that we overlook, not only within the research, but also within professional practice. And especially when we're talking about how do we respond in 2022 and beyond, how do we respond to the issues that are adversely impacting the lives of children and young people? And one of the things that we oftentimes don't talk about is the impact of racism. When we're talking about systemic, structural racism, institutionalized racism, and how does that create an impact for different communities, and especially when we're talking about children and young people that come from particular backgrounds. And without boring you with all of the statistics, we know that there is an overrepresentation underrepresentation as it relates to exclusions, an overrepresentation as it relates to stop and search, an overrepresentation when we're talking about children that end up in things like alternative provisions, when we're talking about children and young people that need a potentially a safe move from a particular environment that may cause or be a cause of concern due to some level of violence or antisocial behavior. So we don't have to go through the data because there are so many reports and there are so many pieces of literature that people have took the time to do research and conduct to give us an understanding of what's essentially taking place. We know racism is a perfect and an issue, and it's live. One of the things that we oftentimes overlook, and many of my trauma colleagues or specialist colleagues in the building would also agree, is the impact of children's mental health and their well-being.
The course is the Working with Gangs and Serious Youth Violence Level 3 course. It's an accredited programme which is accredited through AIM, formerly known as OCN West Midlands. We have 8 different modules to the programme, which basically is designed to give you a holistic understanding of working with young people impacted by serious youth violence and gangs.
These programs are important because what we're trying to recognise in the country is that there needs to be a standard, and a standard around recognising how do we respond to serious youth violence, how do we respond to all forms of criminal exploitation as it affects our children and young people and our wider families within the community.
I think the Gangs and Serious Youth Violence course was probably one of the best things I've done in the last decade, for sure.
It's been a great experience so far. I've met so many people from so many different backgrounds and professions, working really widely across the youth sector, and it's been really helpful to listen to other people's points of views and experiences.
It was the first course, it was a certificate that I'd had for a long time, something that I wanted. I now write programmes, so I've written a couple of programmes on gang awareness and prevention, knife awareness, self-awareness, bullying. So before I did the gangs course, if you would have asked me to do something like that, I would have told you I ain't got a clue what you want about, how am I going to do that? So for me, the course was amazing because it's just opened up lots of things that I didn't know that I could do that I'm now doing.
Being an adult learner, number one, and someone who hasn't been in necessarily formal education for a long time, coming into a course that had so many options to support you through your learning, it was quite clear when I started the course that the objective of the educators wasn't for me to just get through the course, but it was to make sure that the students understood and had a full understanding and a holistic understanding of the information.
I've been looking at courses to do with youth and gang violence for quite a long time now, and this one really stood out, A, because it's one of its kind, there's not many about, and secondly, the professionals that lead this particular course are outstanding in their field.
We work with a range of practitioners, people who are specialists within their fields, who have years of experience in working with young people that have their own specialisms as well.
Bringing people in with lived experience is a really important aspect, and that's something that's happened. I grew up in an environment where I've lived around serious youth violence and can say I've been a victim to that. Also having people from communities that are working every day in serious youth violence come in and deliver to the people on the course or the cohort. So I think it's unique in that sense because actually you're learning directly from people with experience.
The importance of having people like myself on this programme as recognised as one of the leading experts in the country around responding to serious youth violence, I think it kind of gives that USP to the course, that it means that the organisers that have developed this particular programme have really thought about who do we bring in to give those real insights.
I've always done little one-day courses and stuff like that, but yeah, they're nothing like this. This is the course that gave me more knowledge and more understanding of working with young people, especially serious youth violence.
I have not experienced a course like this before. I've been to uni, I've studied criminology, had probably two good lecturers, but this course was just different. It was like, I actually looked forward to like what the topics were, how I can apply it and stuff like that. And it was like a little family. It ended up being like a little family, everyone helping out each other.
This is the only qualification in the UK. In fact, we've been hard pushed to find this qualification anywhere in the world. And we know because we looked, there's no other qualification like it. It's a course that is very much rooted in the community. It's very much grounded around having that holistic understanding of actually how do you work with young people who are impacted by gangs and serious youth violence.
That's why this course will have people from the police force, from social workers, from people who are working as teachers, people working in PRUs, people who are in the youth offending service. Everyone comes to this course because there are no other courses like this.
I think a lot of professionals make an assumption as to what serious youth violence is, and I think a lot of professionals band children into the term gang, when actually there is a significant difference between children that are engaging in serious youth violence, gang members and organised crime groups.
We have two courses which cater for, I suppose, different types of circumstances. So we have our distance learning course, which enables you to study alone basically, go at this particular program. You get access to our portal, you get pre-recorded content, and you can just basically study this program by yourself. And that program is open all year round. The blended learning course currently runs once a year. So we usually start the course in and around April time, and it lasts until November, December. But the blended learning gives us the option to, work with other people and also get those lectures live. So that's whether that's live online or as well face-to-face. So it's that blended learning experience that we offer through our certificate program.